Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so very much for spending the next hour or so with us. We plan to run an hour-long discussion followed by half an hour of Q&A, and we hope you will stay for that. You will stay for that as well. My name is Monika Fabijanska, and I am the curator of the exhibition titled Ecofeminisms, currently presented at Thomas Erben Gallery in Chelsea, in New York. This exhibition is on view until July 24th in the physical space of the gallery from Monday to Friday, 11 to 6. The meeting today, the conversation starts our online programming, and all the programming, of course, for the exhibition because of the coronavirus is happening online. So we will have these 3 conversations on 3 consecutive Wednesdays at the same time with artists participating in the exhibition and special guests. And we will also soon post a gallery walkthrough with my commentary on the works in the exhibition, shot live in gallery space. So we will basically bring the exhibition to you, and that should happen later this week. So without further ado, I wanted to introduce the gallery owner and director, Thomas Erben. Usually you want to cut your thank you short. I could go for an hour probably. I will only say that we became friends when I was working on my previous show on the representation of rape in American women's art. And it was Thomas who made possible for me to include the work by Segall and Goody, which was absolutely important to address the stereotypes of on rape of artists of color, and to have a Black artist with an abstract work was absolutely crucial for the show. And Thomas understood it to the point that he spent half a year chasing the work for me and securing it. So it's not, we're not talking of a normal dealer who would just let you, find it somewhere else. And it was his invitation to the gallery that I accepted, thinking that this exhibition could find its home in a commercial gallery space because we will present it much faster, and the urgency of the subject matter that we're discussing does not really require a perfect exhibition. It requires a constant discussion on that. So without further ado, Thomas Erben.
Yeah, good evening, Monika. Thank you very much for your kind words. I also want to thank all the artists for actually trusting us with the exhibition. And of course, I want to welcome everybody to this first Zoom conversation at the occasion of Ecofeminisms, our current show here at the gallery. I have to say that I'm particularly pleased to host this exhibition at a moment when so many health assumptions are challenged, and we are left on a global scale, which is, I think, probably the first time that we are all so aware that what's happening right now is pervasive on a global scale. What leaves us now with a sense of being unmoored and a pervasive sense of insecurity. One of the most important questions, which I think is currently our ecological crisis. So many crises are currently surfacing, but what unites us all basically as a species is that we are living on this planet, and we are in our environment. We are a part of this environment as a species. I think a particularly important contribution of this exhibition is now that it offers us an examination of the conditions, the underlying structures which brought us to this point of crisis. And it's only in addressing these that we can genuinely affect change. I'm passing now the word back to Monika, who I'm sure is very well prepared and will guide us now through this conversation. Monika, it's back to you.
Thank you. Thank you so much. I wanted to greet the artists who are the main characters of today's conversation, Lynn Hirshman Leeson, Mary Mattingly, and Hanae Utamura, and our special guest, Dr. Julie Reiss, whose specialty is environmental art. And before I will read their bios, and they will present and discuss their own artworks, which will be the beginning of our conversation, I wanted to give you a very short introduction to what the exhibition really proposes, which will serve as a backdrop to this conversation. So first of all, I understand this exhibition as a research project. I myself question the term ecofeminism, and I wonder through this project whether it is useful to us as a historical term. What could it mean if we only consider art made in 1970s and maybe the beginning of 1980s as representative or specifically ecofeminist? Or can we use this term in referring to contemporary culture as well? Is there any connection, any continuation, or quite to the contrary? And to have this, we have to have in mind that not only the situation of women artists on the market changed radically during the last 50 years, but also our concept of gender changed. So can we really ask the question that a feminist artwork devoted to environmental issues is in any way different from a work made by a male artist or a person who would not identify with either of those terms, but somewhere in the middle, or none of these. So these are open questions, and this is what this conversation should serve. And I'm sure that we will hear many aspects about many aspects of environmental and feminist art, which will inform our understanding of these. I can only share 4 specific features that I found repeatedly connecting and present in all the early artworks. And these are, first of all, the early ecofeminism is really founded in spiritual, ecofeminism is founded in spiritual feminism, meaning the belief that the culture, the divide between culture and nature, the male and the female element, and of course the mind and the body can be reunited. Very often artists use rituals of cleansing, of healing, of caring. And that is an aspect that has not been very present in our research in recent years. The second element, which of course links this art to all conceptual art, is the announcement of painting. In women's case, in feminist artists' case, it has a specific underlining, meaning not only that they are not included in art galleries in the early 1970s and even later, but also they act against the idea of genius, of a finished masterwork, and try to find a new way of making paintings that would include or be based on the idea which is present in nature, which is a constant change. With it goes, of course, natural materials and the efforts not to leave footprint. So if you think of land art, for example, classical examples would often include using machinery. Women en masse, with exception of Agnes Denes, would avoid this. The third point is radical leaving of the gallery space. Of course, nobody wanted women there to begin with. But once they were not allowed the gallery space, they, I think, pushed art to really radical ends. And especially women who started working with wastelands, reclaiming wastelands, cleansing the contaminating soil and water. And we have a few examples of that in the exhibition. Lucy Lippard brilliantly called them garbage girls, because male did not do that kind of work at all. And finally, what is very, very typical for that early ecofeminist work and another of its fundaments is understanding of a certain intersectionality, meaning that the same Western patriarchal trends in philosophy and religious systems are used and built to enable abuse of women, nature, and the native people. And these 4 points I've found overwhelmingly present in these works. I'm not sure they're all present today, some are not. But that's our backdrop for the conversation. And for that specific reason, I invited a scholar who specializes in environmental art, but does not represent a feminist perspective, and whom I hope will add a lot to this discussion. Julie Reiss is a pioneering scholar in the field of installation art. She is the author of From Margin to Center, The Spaces of Installation Art, MIT Press 1999. In addition to numerous articles and reviews, Julie has spoken on panels related to art and the climate crisis, including Shifting Domains, Artists Respond to the Threatened Ecological Commons, Marfa Ballroom Dialogues, 2013, and Landscapes and Anthropocene, College Art Association, 2016. She chaired a panel on art in the Anthropocene at the 2017 Conference for the Council for European Studies. She is the editor of Art, Theory, and Practice in the Anthropocene. Sorry, I lost the line. In 2019, she organized the symposium, The Role of Art in the Environmental Crisis at Christie's Education, and was the guest critic on the same theme at the Brooklyn Rail. She directs modern and contemporary art and the market, an accredited MA program at Christie's Education. Welcome, Julie. And let's first jump to the artist presentations, and then you four will take it over. So the first artist from whom we will hear about her work in the exhibition is Lynn Hershman Leeson, an artist and filmmaker acclaimed for the pioneering use of new technologies through which she addresses issues such as trauma, identity loss, and the relationship between the real and the virtual. Her work in media-based technology pioneered digital art forms. She also made some of the earliest works that used artificial intelligence, biological computing, and DNA manipulation. As a film director, she wrote, directed, and produced Strange Culture, Conceiving Ada, and Technolust, all starring Tilda Swinton, which screened at the Sundance, Toronto, and Berlin festivals, and a 2011 groundbreaking documentary, Women Art Revolution. Hershman Leeson's 2014 retrospective, organized at the ZKM Karlsruhe in Germany, traveled to Yerba Buena Center in San Francisco in 2017. Her works are in the collections of MoMA, Whitney Museum, ZKM, LACMA, Asif MoMA, Walker Art Center, Berkeley Museum of Art, and National Gallery of Art of Canada, among others. She received Zigraf Lifetime Achievement Award, Prix Ars Electronica Golden Nika, Guggenheim Fellowship, USA Artist Fellowship, National Endowment for the Arts, and College Art Association Lifetime Achievement Award. She lives and works in San Francisco and New York City, and I'm extremely, extremely pleased that she agreed to be part of this exhibition and part of this conversation.
Thanks for inviting me. So are we going to show some images first of mine? Or?
Yes, they will go as you speak.
Okay, so much of the work that I do kind of addresses issues that nobody talks about in varying environments. And some of the early works dealt with cyborgs and the inability to really breathe in a culture that was so suppressed, particularly women. So I made these breathing machines that would talk or try to breathe or laugh as you approached them. So it created a two-way dialogue. And these were as early as 1966, they happened. And then I think we have another cyborg coming. Maybe we could just keep showing this. We could just go through it every 10 seconds or so. Put
they should switch naturally.
The next cyborg is more of a looking inside yourself, or looking inside individuals. So this again was 1966, and it was, there were the question of, like the interior breath and the interior mechanisms, and this was also around the time the word cyborg was actually coined at that time. And so then beyond the body, you start to think about what the society's like and what culture's like, and how in those days, how oppressive it was. And that was part of the reason I created something that it was a character that would go out into the world, and her name was Roberta Brightmore. Maybe we could show a little bit about so this was Roberta. That started a few years later in '72, and it was a woman who really reflected the and refracted the position of a single woman during that moment in time. And she lived almost for 10 years, and in that time she set up a system of creating objects and archives that one proved her existence, and also became kind of a archive that one could look through later to understand some of the prejudices that women faced. Can we go to the next slide? Maybe,
Tyler, can you upload one slide after another Yeah.
So for instance, Roberta went to a psychiatrist, a real psychiatrist, and I have her psychiatric records. What are the things that make somebody real? What is it that causes trauma? How do you circumvent trauma to be effective in the world? She also did things like create records of herself. Like she got credit cards. She had driver's license. She had checks. I think because this was pre-computer, I was able to get away without being arrested for identity fraud. I think 10 years later, it would have been more of a problem. But these are the things, the accumulated artifacts that are the things that identify who we are and identity and how we're perceived. So let's go to the next image. And Roberta was a record of the prejudices that women faced during that time. Everything was wrong with her life, and she could not participate in the culture that she was trying to live in. So a few years later, 20 years later, she came back as this character named Cyber Roberta. And the way this character operated, it was just when the internet was getting started. And you see that she had two eyes, or I call them icons. And you can go to it now at lynnhirshman.com/cyberroberta. You press on her eyes and telerobotically her head moves and takes whatever she sees and posts it on the internet. So she became, in a sense, what became nanny cams, and a way of really creating a broader articulation of how to communicate and surveillance and paranoia using the internet to speak about and to reach out to a even broader audience than Roberta herself could. Well, the earlier works were single object works that you showed in galleries, except that galleries didn't show women. And then the works that came afterwards, with Roberta going out into the world, and then Cyber Roberta. So let's go to the next image. So part of Roberta was, that she was a transient person that evolved over time, and most of the pieces I do evolve over time. So they're performances in time, and I wanted to create something that would show the idea of evaporation as a performance, a transcendence, and a regeneration. And so I made Roberta into water drops. So I used water drops to show the idea of evaporation, both of our spirit, of our individuality, and then the regeneration of water when it subverts some of the toxicity and evaporation challenges that are part of its original era. So and continues over time to regenerate itself in ways that I couldn't have predicted, just like I couldn't have predicted Cyber Roberta when I made Roberta. So let's go to the next image. And then jumping forward to 2012, again, water women, but it's really, these are images of babies who are, we have video of a baby that's projected inside an aquarium. And in this piece, you're able to measure the toxicity of the air and water levels every day wherever this piece goes, so that we become aware, for instance, when the red comes or when the dark comes, how dangerous it is for us. And these invisible forces are so much part of our life, invisible and around us, and we have no real idea what the toxicity that we're breathing and absorbing is. Most of these pieces, I have to say, are never shown in their time. It usually takes 20 or 30 years to show them. So let's go to the next one. And this is a piece, you know, when you start to think about the fact that 502,000 people die every year from contaminated water, and what are the major issues that we're living through today. I wanted to work with the scientists I had worked with on my antibody together to find a way that maybe we could solve or address issues of contaminated water on the planet. So maybe we'll go to the next image. And so the way we did it was, I was very fortunate that we met the people at the Weiss Institute at Harvard. It's a division for biological innovation. And the way this piece is going to work is we're going to put these images of women, water women, some in test tubes, some just etched on plexiglass, over two systems. One is an aquapulse system, which operates through generating water, generating electricity, and the electricity runs through the image of the women in the piece so that they light up and fluoresce, and that's the time that you see the plastic is actually dissolving. And then we discovered another way where where waxworms have developed, but through nature, because I think nature likes to preserve itself or find way to deal with ecology as problems come onto the planet. And these worms just evolved on their own, maybe 5 or 6 years ago, and they eat plastic as well. And so in one sense, you have an ecological system that gets water toxicity out, and the other you have a man-made system of electricity that also cleanses water. These systems can cleanse water 1 liter a minute. So, and they're small, and they're meant to be sent out to places where if they have an earthquake or something where there is a vital need for water, it can happen very quickly. And we'll go to I think the last slide here. Is there another one? Yeah, so these are some of the images, one in your gallery, but there's now 12 images of women, water women, that will be part of this final piece that we'll have by probably October, have all the pieces functional and installed. It was meant to open as an installation this June, but at the new museum, but we couldn't because the museum's closed. So these are some of the ideas of dealing with toxicity of prejudice, toxicity of environment, and circumventing these and transitioning to find ways to continue to live in an enhanced planet.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Lynn. Yeah, this is another diagram that we show in the gallery. We had a little bit of hope that maybe at least the first attempt at showing the work in 3 dimensions would be possible, the first prototype, but the work is still being constructed, and the lab, of course, like everything else in our lives, is closed.
Up, yeah.
But you will show this work next year at the new museum, right?
It will be at the new museum, at the Gwangju Biennial, and at VAC in Moscow, and also ZKM. The same month, all of the same month.
Wonderful, wonderful. I hope they will be working and cleansing water everywhere. Another artist who also focuses a lot of her practice on water is Mary Mattingly, an artist based in Brooklyn. Mary is a photographer and sculptor. She founded Swale, an edible landscape on a barge in New York City to circumvent public land laws. Currently, Mary is artist in residence at the Brooklyn Public Library and preparing to launch Public Water, a public sculpture about New York City's drinking watershed with more art. It's the name of the institution. In 2018, she worked with Brick Arts to build What Happens After, which involved dismantling a military vehicle and deconstructing its mineral supply chain. Her work has been exhibited in museums such as the Museo Nacional de Bellas Artes de La Habana, the Bronx Museum of the Arts, the Brooklyn Museum, Storms King, the International Center of Photography, the Brooklyn Museum, and the Palais de Tokyo. Her work has been featured in Aperture, Art in America, Art Forum, Sculpture Magazine, the New York Times, Le Monde Magazine, New Yorker, and on BBC News, NPR, and Art 21. Mary, thank you so much for being part of this exhibition, and I'm happy to have you join us today.
Thanks, Monika. So in the exhibition, there are 4 photographs, and 3 are from a series titled House and Universe, and 1 is from Swale, the public art project. So I'll start by describing House and Universe. It was, and just in general, the series with the 3 photographs, it was an allegorical series of photographs that combined living systems like floating geodesic capsules with bundles of objects. So these are personal objects that I had collected and I had carried with me. When I was making this work in 2013, I had bundled almost everything in my possession into 7 large boulder-like forms that could be rolled or pushed. And I basically left 1 large bag of things that I used every day outside of the bundles to live with. So one photograph shows a place I lived between a series of intense storms where the houses were covered with whatever scrap was available. I don't know, Tyler, if you want to show that one photograph. Or just
we should basically make our sweet secret private, public. That both it is the first time I'm moderating something on Zoom, and it's the first time Tyler is the host. So please forgive us everything that doesn't work perfectly. We will be better in a week. Tyler, can you put up the video?
Yeah. So one photograph just shows this place that I lived in between a series of storms where the houses were covered in whatever scrap was available. Bundle sculpture is in front of the homes, and it sort of symbolically connects climate disasters with consumption. And that title alludes to the story of Sisyphus, who is the trickster who is tricked in the end, which stuck with me throughout the series, really, as I dragged these bundles from one place to another, from studio to studio across towns where I was invited to recreate performances, and back into and out of storage spaces. There's another image of a naked body of a person who was in my life from behind with a large boulder of things. It's provocatively titled Life of Objects. That's the image. And all of this work sort of revolved around this online library that was called ownit.us, and it's shown in the video that sort of catalogs the things that I bundled and illustrates the pathways of the objects, sort of their supply chain and how they came into my life. So if the information wasn't readily available, then I would try calling the company to learn more, or make a digital file of each object, either an MP3 or a PDF or a 3D file. This is a screenshot of the website, so you could go to it, email me, and I could send you the file. And I've spent considerable time. You can just let this play or the next video. But I spent considerable time living in and within ecosystems or shelters that I've co-built, and some are pictured in that series, House and Universe. Those experiences have asked me to really reconsider my surroundings and to vision how collections can function as monuments to consumption, and how, as an inhabitant of New York City, I can make the collective monument called a landfill. I'm sort of part of that, right? So, so the video that I think Tyler will pull up now shows the absurd performances that sort of I would pull these bundles through New York City, really to emphasize the weight of these objects. Here I pushed a bundle over the Bayonne Bridge between Staten Island and New Jersey right before the bridge was to be renovated so that the largest post-Panamax ships could reach the port of New York, New Jersey. At the time, the Bayonne Bridge's lower height really slowed down port traffic considerably, making the port less relevant to the global shipping industry than, say, ports in South Carolina or California. And yeah, so absurd performances in public, documented sort of all, and I can talk about the fourth photograph in the exhibition, which is Swale. So Swale is the name of a floating food forest on a barge that I led and co-built with a number of partners citywide, from civic groups to individuals who may be here, like Kat Kiefer and Amanda McDonald Crowley. It docked at piers in Brooklyn and Governor's Island and the Bronx, adjacent to New York's public land on the Bronx River, beginning in 2016 through 2019. So as a public artwork, it utilized the common law of the water as a loophole to do what was illegal on public land. So Swale was a platform where anyone could pick fresh foods for free, which is an illegal public act when committed on public land in New York City. So I thought of Swale as a folly, as something that's out of place in order to surprise people and to ask people to reconsider their surroundings. As it grew, it really resembled this landform or small island that was bobbing on the water. But when you were on board, I think sitting on top of a small hill, the city appeared to be moving, not you. Swale docked at the Bronx River, adjacent to Concrete Plant Park, neighboring Hunts Point, with the help of Youth Ministries for Peace and Justice, and really acted as a catalyst for what could happen in public parkland there. It was run by 15 young people through the state's Summer Youth Employment Program, who at first they'll tell you they really were looking forward to being somewhere in air conditioning that summer, but then later I think they tell you they really loved stewarding Swale, and now some of them are environmental ambassadors, or some of them do work with food and environmental justice. A number of organizations supported Swale in the Bronx, including the Bronx River Alliance and the Urban Field Station, as well as a parks commissioner who was really willing to take a chance. And in 2017, New York, in part at least, backtracked on its foraging law and launched its first foodway in Concrete Plant Park. And I'll just say, in a city with only 100 acres of designated community garden space versus 30,000 acres of public parkland, the foodway is a place where anyone can come 24 hours a day and pick fresh foods for free. So the work that is here, I think, and the work that I do in general, sort of straddles the allegorical, whether through storytelling, whether with storytelling through photography or co-creating stories through public artwork. I utilize photography because it still tends to be seen as believable and possible, and public artwork really prefigures what's possible by modeling it and co-building processes that allow space to vision together. So taking visioning as far as possible until it can actually help create the way a social system is run is a lofty goal. Thanks.
Thank you very much. We're getting there. with the images. The third and last artist who's on the panel today is Hanae Utamura, multimedia artist working in video, performance, installation, and sculpture. Hanae received her MA from Chelsea College of Art and Design and her BA from Goldsmiths, University of London, and exhibits extensively in Asia, Europe, and the US. Numerous international residencies and fellowships include Akademie Schloss Solitude in Stuttgart, Künstlerhaus Bethanien in Berlin, Pakt Zollverein in Essen, Art Omai in Ghent, New York, Santa Fe Art Institute Residency, Aomori Contemporary Art Center in Aomori, Japan, National Museum of Contemporary Art and Chandong Art Studio in Seoul, Korea, and Florence Trust in London. She has been awarded NIFA Immigrant Artist Mentoring Program here in New York City, Shiseido Art Egg Award, Japanese Ministry of Culture Grant, Pola Art Foundation, UNESCO Ashburn Bursary Award, and Axis Florence Trust Award. In 2019, Hanae was a visiting scholar at New York University as part of Japan-US Exchange Friendship Program in the art. Utamura is based in New York and Buffalo. Hanae, to you.
Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining tonight. So I would like to introduce the work.
Tyler, you can start playing all three Hanae videos as she speaks in the background.
I hope you can hear me okay. So I would like to introduce the piece that I'm showcasing in the exhibition, which is a very early work of mine, a video performance series which was created in 2010 to 2013. And it came out as a part of my research under a question of what progress means, and which was quite related to my experience in corporation, working in a company in Tokyo. And in this performance series, I made a set of rules, 3 rules. So the first is no rehearsal and just only happens once, and work with the date that I chose to do, and work with the weather as a given condition of the performance. And second is no public announced performance. So usually I set up the camera, and camera is the only witness, or sometimes there is a person or who is watching the camera, but it's mainly kind of private action. And the third is starting out from my intention, but then the work incorporates with the intention something beyond in here, namely the nature or the weather or phenomena that happens after the piece. So the timeline of the performance is basically, it's including also after the action that I'm doing until my trace basically disappears. So in this case, for example, in the desert, the wind, and but the video mainly shows as a repetition of the actions. So when the work completes, that's somewhere in our mind. So the timeline of the performance exists somewhere in an infinite repetition. So kind of like permanent cycles, actually. So it's a little bit different from this continuous timeline that we live, but could be quite more ontological. So I would go into the details. For example, so this is the last piece that I've done in the series in 2013. And often the place and location is very important. And in this piece specifically was located at the border between North and South Korea, and in an island called Mendieta Island. And this land is basically a newly emerged land which appeared during the tide. So it's usually, it's the ocean, and on the other side of the shore, you can also see North Korea. So during the tide in these settings, I situated this one pole as a person, and then started to draw a line, which in this case symbolizes the border. But also after this, I started to draw a circle, which juxtaposes with another another political actually symbol, which is connected to Fukushima nuclear disaster. And in this case, the circle indicates the evacuation zones. which was drawn artificially around the power plant, which also was the base of compensation money distribution afterwards. But the way that nuclear distributed by the wind wasn't at all accurate to these artificial circles. So here, it's called when a line becomes a circle. I do these 3 acts. So the first is lines, and then the second is drawing circles, and then the last act is I draw a bigger circle that goes out of the frame, which then you can only see the lines. And after this, the video doesn't show it, but the ocean comes back, and basically this trace of mark would disappear. So often, like, my motivation comes this frame as like a diagram to think also politically, but also geometrically, the meaning of what we are doing in our kind of condition. So the screen or the image as a still image is quite important for me. It's almost like a kind of like, diagram or mandala, or like just keep repeating and thinking about what is this all means, basically. Because, for example, in the settings in North and South Korea, usually you don't see any lines, you just see the ocean. But like the border is very strong in our mind. And so, yeah, and the next piece, for example, in the red line, it's called, and it was made again right after in 2011 when tsunami and nuclear disaster happened in Japan. And here I'm using a medium of a kind of non-toxic pigment, which is red pigment. And my original intention was to create this red line as like a family line between the land and ocean. But on that day, the wind was so strong, and in this case, the wind blows another line. But then after the action, the rain might pour and might actually complete maybe my intention, but it's not really proof. I don't go back there and take a photograph of the proof. So in a way, like, these acts also, in some ways also, in my case, like, was thinking about new form of painting in a way that, how can I say, like, which doesn't complete just within our own just human intentions, but incorporates or completes with the time and also nature force. So yeah, this was what was in mind, and yeah.
Thank you. We have a whole selection of those videos. They come together into a loop of about 20 minutes, and we present, I think, 6 of more or less 10 or 12 that Hanae did between 2010 and 2013. I would like to now switch us into a conversation mode, and I hope that Julie will help us get in this mode with her comments maybe on how science and art come together in environmental practices, and maybe reacting to what the artist said. And I hope that you will also comment on how do you interact with science and with scientists, and what consequences does it have for you and for us?
you want us just to start talking, or are we waiting for Julie?
I was thinking that Julie would chime in. Julie, can you hear us? We cannot hear you.
I know, I had muted myself during the presentation, so I wouldn't make any noise, I'm sorry. First, thank you to all three artists. You know, last June, I edited something for the Brooklyn Rail. Mary was good enough to submit a text to that. There are 10 different texts in there about how artists are responding to the environmental crisis. And really what struck me then is what strikes me now, is how different all three of your concerns for the environment manifest themselves, whether it's in working with community and public art, or Lynn, the amazingly sophisticated work you've done in collaboration with science and AI, or Hanae with these beautiful personal pieces that, unlike humans, actually leave no trace in the environment. It's something to aspire to, I think, what you do. So first, I just want to say that there's an incredible range here, and I'm always just blown away by that. And I think when people make work that has to do with the environment, they make it out of their own concerns as human beings. And so what they do is going to reflect so much about who they are. And so I think that's how I would sort of begin this. You all work with science in a different way. Mary, I heard you speak at the Night of Philosophy at the Brooklyn Public Library this winter, and I absolutely loved your discussion. Mary began with the macro. I mean, she was just out here on the globe and slowly, slowly, slowly brought issues of water and politics and economics around to a particular bit of water in a particular place. And the amount of research that you had done and the way that you could speak of all of that, I think your entry point to science to me is based on a kind of social science. How do all of these things fit together, and how do you in the end make it something that people can connect with? And that's sort of one way to do that. And Lynn, you know way more about technology than I ever will, but I just, I love your statements about how artists can help scientists be more intuitive. And I was talking with Monika yesterday about how different science-based organizations have begun to work so closely with artists. The Natural Resources Defense Council has an artist in residence. Now the Audubon Center wants a society wants an artist in residence. Union for Concerned Scientists is doing projects with artists. It's a kind of natural pairing. And on the one hand, you could say intuitive artists, logical scientists, but so many artists have this research process that's not maybe as different from science as we think. And I imagine that those collaborations, whether you want to think about environmental humanities programs or feminist science, people like Donna Haraway, these different ways of coming to science. I think that that's something that you've really led the way on. And Hanae, your work is ultimately science-based in terms of understanding the environments that you're working in and the environments, the fragility and the threats that they're under. And yet you were able to personalize it in a way that I think everybody, I speak for myself, but I'm absolutely certain I'm not alone here, can connect to that feeling that you have, sort of the enormity of all of it, and how you can try to push back against it, make it your own, understand it, grasp it, but ultimately leave no trace. So I guess long answer to Monika's question, we're looking at a time where nature-culture boundaries seem very, very fragile. We can't really talk about a pure nature anymore that's not altered in some way by human presence living here. We're looking at a blurring of boundaries between science and nature. And I think your works, all of your works somehow touch on some of these things and offer models of how to be here in a really hard time. Does that sort of answer your question, Monika?
I don't think you can answer any of those questions. I think we open the questions farther. I would like to ask Lynn and Mary and Hanae, how do they, what's the nod, what's the nature of your collaboration with scientists and science? Because, you know, if we look historically, we can think of two models. We can, of course, think of the role that art played before modernism. Think of Leonardo da Vinci, right? Where art really was a tool for cognition. And but we can also think of a very traditional way in which artist serves as an illustration, you know, basically somebody who feeds in illustration to certain concepts. And I think that you all use both, and you use very different approaches that are new. And I would like you to talk a little bit more about that.
I mean, I think that the scientists I work with have the same qualities as artists. You know, we all start out with a goal, and they have certain ways of approaching something that are use a particular discipline that the best ones don't pay attention and invent their own way of solving a problem. And I think that that's the way artists work as well. So if you work with fabricator, for instance, you know, they have certain skills to make something, and you come together and you invent something together that neither of you would have been able to, even though you both have the same ambition at the start of it. It really broadens the possibilities of solving something and making it, putting it in the world in a poetic and effective way. I mean, I've had a great success with the people that I've worked with, and we continue to work together. They're generally not just one project.
Yes, because this is part of one of the groups that you're working with now on the current project, helped you construct antibodies, right?
Yes, that was Thomas Huber from Novartis, and we had such a great time working together and making something. We didn't know what we were going to do and making this, and then we started to think about what are the issues that are really vibrant and alive that need to be solved on the planet today. And we came up, of course, with the idea of water. And I think because Thomas was a renowned scientist, I was able to then meet other people quickly. Sometimes when I'm working alone, it could take me 3 or 4 years for scientists to respond to my nonstop requests. But with Thomas, we're able to move right in and get the approvals and start to go forward to solve this issue, which I think that this project will be really effective with. So it's really, I think, broadens your way of thinking, because they have a base understanding that it's not in my experience, and then it reverses itself. So in a sense, it's like a DNA form, you know, of us sharing information.
So the way you describe it, I understand that you are with the scientists all the way through the project, and the projects that have eventually some appliance in the, let's call it the practical world. You are involved in them as much as the scientists influence the final product, which is art. So it's all,
it really twists together, although I have to say that the technology and the science that actually made the process for the electrocution of plastic is something that has been developing for many years at Harvard. So I can't claim to any ownership of that process, but working together, we did create these artworks.
Mary?
Yeah, so I think, you know, I use science with a capital S, the data, like climate change modeling data predictions, to look at what will like thrive in a future place. I would say though, different forms of science, like biological or geologic or social, do really drive me to make artwork in general. So I think, yeah, my answer might be more general, but you know, from learning about industrial farming practices as a young person, living in a place where there wasn't clean water to drink because of farming practices, made me aware of issues surrounding health and science, and even I think basic forms of water purification with carbonated charcoal. Also growing up in a rural agricultural town meant I learned about plants as food and even medicinal properties of plants, which I'd say are indigenous place-based practice, forms of scientific practice that projects like Swale have depended on. But I think all the larger public projects that I do with other people who are specialists, who are engineers, I'd say that's where the science comes in for the most part, is when I can work with an engineer who knows about appropriate technology. So a technology that's specific to that uses materials that are specific to a place and looks at the weather and the conditions of a place and designs for that. So instead of a one-size-fits-all design, working with someone like this engineer, Lonnie Grafman or Liz Lund, who also might be here, to design a slow sand filter to clean river water in New York City to use it for plants. Those are sort of like maybe more basic do-it-yourself technological interventions that might be more of the way that I tend to work. But yeah, I will use science with capital S and look at modeling predictions, look at what the Forest Service is doing to look backwards at fossil records to see what plant species inhabited place millions of years ago, and you know, and looking at how they're trying to like repopulate metasequoias and places where they have since gone extinct. That's something that data like that is something that I've tried to utilize in different projects in order to like create that folly again, I'll use that word, where it's sort of like something that's out of place. And the example that I have is this project in New York State called Along the Lines of Displacement, where palm trees were brought from agricultural zones 9 and 10 to 6 and 7, which is upstate New York right now, which according to climate change predictions in 40 years, those plants will be seen on the regular there. And so I think what that reminds me is that this is a time when geologic time has caught up with human time, and that I'll regularly see these in my lifetime in a place that I'm just not used to right now.
Oh, what a beautiful interaction with Hanae's work, because Hanae thinks a lot about geological time and time. She has a very philosophical approach to how science is present in our lives as a way to negotiate with our presence with nature. Hanae, would you like to comment on that?
Yeah. So science for me has quite a personal touch to it, in terms of growing up under a father who was nuclear engineering, who was involved in nuclear engineering. So I would separate science and maybe technology, but science as a kind of approach of human curiosity to really explore the world. And on the other hand, technology as something that is based on like, could be humans' idealism. I mean, for instance, like in my lifetime, I experienced again, like, well, growing up, nuclear energy was believed also to bring equality, and also, well, it was kind of introduced, I mean, like at least my father believed in it, that it would solve the world's energy problem. And having also a consequence of that, it always enholds this more humanitarian wish, longing, and technology progresses, but then always consequences are unexpected. So I guess that's where also the question comes in my practice, which I didn't mention in the earlier work, but the trace and also the disappearance of, well, for example, like the Sahara Desert, and kind of cleaning as also brush, but leaving, well, so try to flatten the surface of the desert, which was the purpose of my action, but then leaving the trace of footprint, which is totally kind of unexpected. And kind of like these two cycles are always in my head when I think about science. And I also recall, like, but also science and holds somewhere like the timeline that is beyond our lifetime, which is connected to geological time. But I give you an example of when I visited nuclear fusion science lab in Aomori in Japan. And it's a lab that is still not realized, but using the similar technology as sun produces the life. And but it's still quite at the early stage, and nobody really knows. I mean, when I talk to scientists, they are talking about something that might not be realized in their lifetime, but really, really detailed steps every day, like recording the numbers. And it's considered as clean energy, but yeah, we don't know yet. And so, yeah, to me, yeah, I wish also that science and maybe also humanity field could work together maybe more, that in terms of, yeah, in this kind of, yeah.
Thank you. I wanted to remind everyone that the artists are as much for you as they are for us, and that everybody can ask questions. We've already talked for an hour. And please use the chat channel to communicate the questions to me, and I will try to read as many as I can. And as you do that, and as you think of your questions, I will read the first one that came, which was my next question, which is absolutely perfect. Now, of course, it's Aviva Rahmani, one of the artists in the exhibition, who is asking you what I was going to ask, obviously, and whether feminism, feminist ideas, or ecofeminism in particular, in any way have influence on your work, on your strategies, on your practices, what these terms, how important they are in your work today, and also historically, because having you, Lynn, allows us to go back to the sources, not only that you have incredible career, but you are also you have also a great knowledge of feminism, having done a movie about other feminist artists. And I think that we could also hear from you not only a personal reflection, but a little bit broader reflection. I would love it.
Well, you look at the difficulties on the planet, I think, and particularly with equality, which is part of toxicity if it doesn't exist, of aversion to hearing all voices, to censorship, so these issues that women were trying to deal with and did deal with senses of humor and being forced out of a system that already existed, which was able to, which created a method of going beyond the existence of places and finding your own way to find a voice and to be effective in the world. So in that sense, I think that this is all, the issues that we were dealing with in feminist thinking was really about equality and access and really having an effect on the world. And I think that as you go beyond that and start to look at ways that you can create metaphors that are not just existing on a poetic level, but actually could enhance in a real way the way that we experience life, then the two come together in the idea of ecofeminism. Mm-hmm. That answers your question.
Mm-hmm. Mary, Hanae?
Yeah, I mean, I think ecofeminism in particular can be expansive. And I think, maybe at first I thought, well, all categories by their definition are reductive and humans are often contradictory. So, but ecofeminism, I sort of see as plural, as positing maybe a feminist system or a distinctive practice that stands against the still dominant patriarchal culture. So I look at it as a tool that doesn't necessarily need to state that maybe women are closer to nature, although people like Vandana Shiva will probably give statistical proof that this may very well be the case, but it needs to urge people to stand in solidarity with oppressed, so I'd say broadly, nature or non-humans, and that's the eco part, and then with other oppressed people due to race, due to religion, due to income, and that's the feminist part. So I guess for ecofeminists to deny participation in the patriarchal dominant culture, which is also ingrained with forms of competition instead of cooperation, and extend the allyship to oppressed and often overlooked, but still like much relied upon non-humans in order to practice interdependence in forms of mutual care and maintenance. I think ecofeminism to me speaks to like so much to what I aspire to. And we talked about this before. It's also sort of like there's an opportunism with jumping on to ecofeminism, and I think that that's something that I'm also very aware of, is that there is an advantage to being able to I don't know, to expand categories that also have this history that that can't, that has to be, I don't know, lifted up. So I think that's right. Where I.
Yeah, we had a little bit of that conversation. I was curious what Mary would say, because I we didn't have exactly that conversation before the exhibition, which is part of taking risks. And I was always thinking that I always answer to this idea that labels are diminutive or narrowing potential meaning of your work in a very simple way. I believe that there were many quite successful women artists in the 19th century, and the reason why they did not become important for the posteriority is that they were not written about and did not become part of history. And I speak from the perspective of a feminist art historian. The tool that I have is my pen, right? And I need words to write, and with words come labels. So my only hope and understanding of this process is that other people will also contribute different perspectives, and that ecofeminism, if it's valid, it is not the only way of looking of your work. Even environmental art would not be. You cover, especially, there's some artists in the exhibition, actually most of them who most of their career devoted to ecological concepts, but there are others like Lynn who did not, for whom the subject comes back and disappears. And you cannot define an artist by one label. I never meant to do that, so I just wanted to make sure. And before we go to Hanae, I actually have a question for Mary that is a continuation. It would be nice to bring it here. Somebody asks, I realize it's related to earlier work, but I'm very interested in hearing more about her research on collecting/collections and consumerism and how that relates to ecofeminism. It seems to me in some ways very personal work. And I remember when I first saw that work, I was reminded of the photos we see of people in Asia with bicycles filled beyond imagination.
Yeah, I mean, I think, God, there's a lot of questions in there. I think about system science and economics, and to sort of delve into a supply chain of an object has helped me make sense of a violent world through patterns that I think all rely on decentralization, making them almost indecipherable. So, and I think I really focused on this in terms of photography, because that was what I was, relying on, that I think has the heaviest supply chain, and thought about, I guess, the role, how that the camera that I photograph with makes me quite complicit in the system of global oppression, and sort of from there trying to imagine what's possible. So I think some of the earlier work is maybe starting from a place of figuring that out, and then maybe the public work gets to the point of thinking about what's possible. So I think, I spent a lot of time looking at cobalt and the camera, and then how it was connected to the military vehicle that was built by Oshkosh Defense, which really models this decentralized system that I think almost eliminates the space for an ethic, because there are so many brokers and there are so many companies in between a place where the mineral might be mined, you know, in the same country that is at war to make the weapons, you know, for the very place that the weapons will be used, I guess. So I think, I'm not sure if I'm clearly answering the question, but I think that through allegory and starting with the story of the place where I believe that we're at, and then transforming that to the place where I hope we can be, is what I again aspire to do with our work. So I don't know,
that's actually wonderful, because from my many conversations with environmental artists, I often hear the lack of hope despite the work being done, and I hear hope in your statement. So that's something absolutely wonderful to hear.
Well, I mean, I don't know how to function
without hope.
I can tell you, when I was making photographs all day and on my computer and you know, collaging things, and also I don't know, I didn't really have any hope. So I think that maybe being in public space, I think has been transformative for me. As much as I hope it.
Very. Hanae, can you comment on ecofeminism and feminism,
yeah.
or the lack thereof?
Yeah, a lot has been really well said, and I appreciate what Lynn and Mary said. And just to add, I guess on top of that, to me, like, ecofeminism has two coins of side. One is more towards the critique, which is more for a pre-existing condition or the past, how the civilization had been, and then also for the future, also terms which is more of a tool to reimagine, like, what the world could be if the central object of influence is not, for example, like white man, but also this notion of human, which is, I guess, notion of man, is still, I think, imagined based on maybe man. I feel like there is maybe a new concept of what human can be or what it means. And essentially, like, again, in response to environmental concerns, namely decentralizing human, I guess that could be connected to also this tool, I mean, feminism as a tool and ecofeminism. And another note is that essentially, I mean, that all men were birth out of mother. And I have critiqued, especially back in Japan, that, for example, that I feel in the capitalism circumstances, this raising child or giving birth, this and the voice of this whole big part of society is not really vocal as a productive kind of act, or a productive, and in a way, like, in contrast to how much we talk about supply chains and productions. And I feel that is something about it, and that my country is also facing the lower rate of childbirth. But it's a very paradox also that I feel that questions back what human means, like, in this living planet. Some chose not to, like, give birth anymore because of the future concerns. Some chooses, and I feel that also that's something that is quite I feel that is in lack in a way. Yeah.
Very interesting to hear all of you talk about this, because before I listened to you answer that question, I would have said there was really no use to the term ecofeminism right now at all. And so it's actually kind of wonderful to listen to ways that that you do feel that you have some connection, whether it's to a historical thread or whether it's to the idea of an imagined future or collaboration. Most of my research has focused on the idea of the Anthropocene, and the question there becomes, who is the human in the Anthropocene? Because there's an unequal culpability by the richer capitalist nations on, for example, the entire global South. And that puts men and women in the richer capitalist countries on equal culpability. We can't say that we're not part of that. We're complicit in that. We are absolutely on board with that. And there's plenty of men that are not part of the patriarchy in this world. So it's a troubling term to me that seems to potentially marginalize environmental art and women. And at the same time, the things that you are saying, I think, show how you can recuperate some of the things that are helpful about the term ecofeminism for yourselves and for your own work. And it's just an interesting observation, because when Monika asked me to be on this panel, it was in a way precisely because I don't come at my work from this perspective. I'll notice after the fact that everyone in the Brooklyn Rail thing that I edited was female, except for one person, or everybody on my panel happened to be female. But I didn't really think of it as a deliberate campaign. But I think it is important to, to also place ourselves in the larger context of the global supply chain, of our own participation, and not somehow have our femaleness exempt us from that responsibility.
I think that we have to remember that we really are in a symbiotic relationship with all living things. Absolutely. And that we have to think about our root systems, and root systems in general communicate in a much better and clearer way in being able to share information that protects them. So I think as soon as we start to get into a linear ownership path, it is very destructive to survival on every level.
Yes. I'm reading the questions on the side which pop up and which are incredibly long. So it's very difficult to choose something for you. But before I do that, yes, I'm very happy that Julie's participating in a conversation. We had a conversation yesterday in the gallery, and of course her reaction was, I expected it, but what do you say? I mean, think Richard Long. And I agree. I think that so many of environmental works made by men and women are not different when we look at the works, but when we look at the intentions of the artists, if we have the journals, the diaries, or the interviews with artists recorded, and this is what I based on my research on the early ecofeminists, and we see their intentions, we see that there is a huge difference. Why they came to certain point, or why maybe women went into a more radical direction. I don't really know, especially historically, and a male artist who would deal with wastelands. We will speak about that a little bit more during the next two sessions, where we will have Aviva and Betsy Damon, Aviva Rahmani and Betsy Damon with us. Each Wednesday, we try to touch a little bit different subjects. Julie, so do you think, having seen the exhibition, having also combed through your let's call it mental collection of artworks that you've written about before and analyzed before, do you see any particular patterns, or does it all come across to you as just environmental art? You have to unmute yourself. Did we lose the sound?
I work pretty hard to not see patterns. Sort of the pattern that I saw that got me into this to begin with was just that artists were putting themselves out there to address things that, as an art historian, I would have thought there was no way I could become involved or have a platform where that could become part of the discussion. And I really value that artists have been able to help move the conversation into a different venue so that more people could talk about it. In the 1970s, there was a move toward asking artists to reclaim land by making some kind of environmental art. Robert Morris in the 70s did a land reclamation project, for example. And there was a concern that artists were going to be, in a sense, used to cover up environmental damage. And there was a discomfort with that. So that began and that kind of ended. So, I mean, it's actually given me some interest in going back and, rethinking, where does form come in? Where do aesthetics come in? Are people coming from different trajectories? How is it helpful to look at groups? How is it helpful right now in 2020 to divide things up by gender as opposed to, by place or by practice? You've given me a lot to think about, which is always good because you don't want to get stuck in your ways. But I don't really know about patterns.
I don't know either. I only realize that as much open and radical we want to be, we still use very gendered language as long as we speak about Mother Earth and Mother Nature. I think this conversation has the rights of existence. I have one interesting question here that I'd like to read. We are 6 minutes of 7:30, so if anybody else would like to ask the question, that's the time to do that. Mary's comments about mining minerals and also her video and photographs of moving her possessions around, as well as Hanae's video pieces, seem to me to be a critique or an antagonism to the art market or the art economy. Damien Hirst's Damon's skull, for example, as a foil, taking diamonds out of the ground, he explicitly states money in his art form. I would love to hear if an ecofeminist approach, however broadly defined, is also a reimagining of the art market.
Anna? You should go, Hannah.
Whichever of you would like to address it.
Okay. Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I think I was conscious about that. And also I went true to my feeling that, as I said, this series came out of my experience of working in Tokyo and just the acceleration and accumulation of matters and objects, which to me leaded nowhere, or to keep the economy going, kind of led me to question of producing, again, objects. And to me, for example, there is in that series, I did a piece splashing water in front of the National Gallery in London, in Trafalgar Square. And that was definitely a kind of like a statement to using action painting gestures of, say, Jackson Pollock, and having that permanent collection in the National Gallery behind me, and using a cleaning brush again to splash the paint as painting. Again, permanent, the idea of permanence to me is in the cycle, not in the permanent form of object in a way. So to me, I just went through to my feeling, but yeah, you could say also the critique.
I know we're veering from the question at this moment, but I read this incredible interview with Lynn yesterday at Art Forum, and you were speaking there about permanence and about recording your legacy. I don't want to spoil it. Can you talk about that a little bit too?
Oh, you mean about in DNA?
Yes.
Putting everything. Yeah, I mean, I've been thinking about this now for almost a decade, because DNA has all of our past, all of our history from the first amoeba forward in it. And it also has the scarring. The scarring helps us to survive. It has memories that we can't recall. And so why not? DNA is a perfect archive. And so it seemed to me that this was something that we could use now, because we've been able to invent, thanks to George Church at Harvard, we've been able to invent ways to actually use DNA and transfer almost anything into synthetic DNA. So this to me seemed like the most appropriate way to look at both our past and then also our future. So I was very fortunate to be able to put a lot of my work, much of what I've thought about and much of what I've done, into DNA itself, and create something that's this big, that has all of my history in it. It's a haiku of our life. It becomes both kind of a spiritual metaphor of what we're about, but also a practical one, because you can retrieve this material. So why use a hard drive? Why use drawers? Use the material of your time. And I think that's what we do as artists. We either invent things that we see as the material of our time that we're ready to use, or we use things that other people have invented and collaborate with the technology to create something like this. So I think this is a vehicle that really will guide us into being able to have more space and less baggage, in a sense, to keep things available.
It's amazing. I think that we are in that discussion. What becomes the most interesting subject for me is that almost revolution of a concept of artists. Artists were always our mode of operandi to make sure that our trace is recorded. And now we think how we still do that, but not doing this. This is absolutely fascinating. I don't want to...
I sold it too, by the way, to a museum, to 3 museums. So then you have to think about what's the price of your DNA, and how do you prove that it's really your DNA, and what happens if it evaporates, and all these other questions start to come in. The same things from the old model of what makes art valuable.
What's the addition of your DNA, Lynn?
5 and 1 AP.
I wanted to go back to Mary, because the question really was addressed to Mary first, so I wanted her to answer that, and then we will have Thomas would like to chime, and I wanted Julie to have the final voice as well, and then we will finish the conversation. So Mary, Thomas, and Julie.
Thank you.
So yeah, I think that the bundles of objects were at first, maybe, I was thinking about their collectability and hoping that somebody would buy my things and I would not have them anymore. And, what happened is that I'm carrying them around and they're a lot heavier than they were. And they feel like burdens in a way that they really hadn't before. They were more usable. But I think, I really relate to pivoting away from traditional art spaces, although I believe it does have much to offer. But I just learned so much in public space, and I want to find more people who can engage in process of remediation and reimagining, I think, because the more people involved, sort of the less energy you feel is misspent when you feel like you're on the precipice of a crisis, which I would say is climate change. And being in public is about co-building coalitions. So I think public forums are where I believe my work can be most productive, and I see public sculpture and photography as both as public forums. So I guess that's how I'd answer that question.
Thomas, you wanted to add something?
Yes.
Art market?
About the art market. Yeah, since I'm a gallerist, since I'm an art dealer, of course, that's a bit my domain here. I'm a bit more optimistic about the idea of an art market, or what an art market actually is. So of course there's an utilitarian aspect of art where people simply want to have something beautiful to look at on their wall, decoration, etc. But then there's also the aspect of what we preserve or conserve. To come back to Lynn's idea of her DNA, etc. We also want to conserve or preserve, so to speak, our history of consciousness, as it's, so to speak, expressed in art. And so to end this a bit on an optimistic note in regards to the art market. So I've shown, for example, the work of Segall and Goody, and these are nylon mesh pantyhose pieces. They are filled with sand. So if you think of the materiality of these works, We couldn't guarantee that they will last for 50 years. And that's also metaphorically spoken, they change over time. You put up the piece, you know, since the sand has weight, it draws, it pulls on the material, so it never resumes its original form, which is again completely metaphorical here, the material and what the artist wants to express with these material choices. So, coming back again, for me, the value of art, or what then justifies an art market, or finally what really matters in the art market, is also significance of the work, what it means to us as a humanity, as a society at a certain point in time, how it has actually widened our possibilities of seeing something as art, of you know, the consciousness, the materiality, etc. There are collectors who never have collected a painting, who collect only works on paper, photographs, a Hans Hacke installation. So the market is not as monolithic as is usually seen in more general critical discussions. I just want to chime this in as a perspective of a dealer who has experience with dealing with sometimes really difficult pieces and ephemeral works of art.
Julie, could we have some closing reflections from you?
Yes, this has just been so interesting, but I would just have to say that I agree with Thomas. I mean, I have spent the better part of the last 19 years running a program for people who want to work in the art world at Christie's Education, which is run out of Christie's, which is all about the market. And I got tremendous support for everything I've done from the auction house. And I think there are going to be many people who want to collect things that, in a sense, document this moment that we're in. It may not have happened yet, but I was just, as I said, very pleasantly surprised by the enthusiasm I encountered just at the auction house. And when I was writing for the Brooklyn Rail last year, I was really trying to think, well, what can art do? What can art do? How do we measure its impact? People are always asking me, how do you know if it made a difference? And, you know, I was becoming a little bit cynical because I had gone into this thinking, well, of course, it's just a problem of awareness. If people just knew more, there'd be no problem. But I don't think it's that anymore. I think people are aware. It's a matter of not really wanting to act on what they're aware of. But I believe that the visual art is part of the record of what we tried to do and how we tried to respond. And optimistically, assuming we're all still here in some form or another, there's a human race and a human culture, you know, 100 years from now, 50 years from now. I want people to look back and say, this is how the artists were responding. These are the records. This is what they were trying to do. And what you all are doing has to be part of that. You have to think of it into the future. Won't people want to know that we didn't just take it lying down, right? That there were people that were pushing back. And this is my hope from what all of you are doing, that record is actually really important for that. And hopefully the market will catch up to it for that reason.
It's so fascinating where this conversation went. It's always the most interesting when you have to finish that. We were just beginning. Thank you everyone all the artists, Julie, Thomas, everybody who participated in the conversation, everybody who joined us as guests. Thank you, Tyler Vila, who is behind all of this. And I invite you all to join us next week and 2 weeks from now, also on Wednesday at 6:30 p.m. There will be different artists and we will definitely discuss other aspects of ecofeminism or environmental art or feminism. All these ideas are enormous and they cover so many subjects that I'm sure it will be interesting and we'll be probably much better at using technology. Also, if anybody feels like it, I'm very careful inviting, but certainly within the gallery itself, it's very safe to come. It's more difficult to get there. Getting on public transportation is of course risky, but if you have a safe way of getting there and if you consider yourself theoretically pretty much safe, you can try to join us. If you don't think it's a good idea, we will bring the gallery and the exhibition to you via online platforms and we will inform about this soon. Thank you all. so very much.